Morning, everybody. So I'm back again. You would have thought that I would have said no. But in these moments of weakness, here I am. So thank you again for allowing me this opportunity. So this morning, our message comes from Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. The parable of the 10 bridesmaids. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. The bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took their flasks of oil with their lamps. And the bridegroom was delayed. All of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is a bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all of those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you. And for us, you had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." And that brings us to waiting. That's my mother. And today I want to talk to you frankly about waiting and how today's scripture ties in with our everyday life. Waiting. We wait for the crazy uncles to arrive on Thanksgiving. We wait for the turkey to cook, the pies to bake, all the wonderful things that go along with whatever makes your day meaningful. We plan. We make lists. We do all those things that make us more organized, less frantic, so we can get more accomplished in any given time. Do more, wait less. And the reason I bring all of this up, wait for it, Thanksgiving is next Thursday. Are you ready for your crazy uncles? You're shaking your head no. Okay. So let's talk about those crazy uncles. We all have one. Maybe you are one. Oh, okay. I know in my family, my brother was that one. Now it's my son. You know the one. The crazy uncle. He comes in many sizes, shapes, and descriptions. Sometimes he's the one that shows up at the holidays or at parties, late or tipsy, clothed or not. Sometimes with a significant other or several. And holiday dinner is held for that crazy uncle because we are waiting. Or you have the other kind of crazy uncle. He comes, he's there, he comes early, and he's miserable to be there. He can't believe another year has passed. To do this again? When are we eating? Can't we have to-go plates? And he sets out to terrorize all the children, and no one can wait for this to be over for another year so we can do it all over again. Or maybe you have that crazy uncle, and it turns into, "Wait, did I already tell you again? Did I tell you this story? Wait for it. Stop me if you've heard this." And that goes on for several hours. So you know what I'm talking about. It's your holiday banquet. I grew up poor. I was a child of alcoholics. I didn't have much to call mine, and it seemed like I was waiting all the time. But what I was waiting for was a chance to leave home. I struggled in school because of the instability of my home life. I excelled in both English and music, and that gave me the opportunity to go to college. I also served in the United States Navy, and all of this was done either in spite of or because of my rocky start. What I learned, however, is that being ready and waiting would be my biggest challenges. I didn't grow up in a religious or spiritual household. I did, however, go to church every Sunday with a neighborhood girl. I was baptized as a kid because I got a cookie afterwards. I figured that was worth the wait. I sang in the Navy choir in Meridian, Mississippi after I went to boot camp and attended the church on base there. Somewhere along the way, I found peace and fulfillment by attending church. My father died while I was serving in Pensacola, Florida, and when I went home, I found that I couldn't wait to leave. My mother was drinking more and more, and our relationship, always guarded to begin with, now was very limited and cold. I'll save you all of my trials and tribulations. That could take another couple of hours. But after I ended my service in the Navy, I moved back to New York. I didn't have the luxury of waiting to find work, so I went back to what had sustained me during college, and that was nursing. Over time, age and alcohol had taken their toll on my mother. Her health began to fail, and of her 3 children, her oldest daughter, my sister, had the best relationship with her. My brother, for years, was completely estranged not only from her, but from the entire family. I looked at all of this much like an outsider, cold and clinically. It was what it was. I would call my mother once a week out of duty. I would wait until I knew she would be sober, then I would call, ask 1 or 2 questions, and then I would get off that phone as quickly as I could. Then I would begin the weekly waiting game again until I knew I had to do this all over again. I always knew that my mother wanted to die. She didn't take care of herself. She never went to the doctor, and it was a waiting game until the end, and then it would just be a clean sweep. We could just say, okay, that's done. My sister was more emotional. She couldn't have the "what are your final wishes" talk, so I did. I went to her apartment. My mother was also a hoarder. A neat hoarder, but a hoarder just the same. She lived in Brighton Towers for 17 years, and to look in her apartment, you never knew if she were moving in or moving out. Floor-to-ceiling boxes were everywhere. If 1 coat was good, 20 coats were better. Boxes and boxes of shoes were great because you never knew when you might need them. So when I went to her place for our talk, I asked all those right questions. I asked her if she wanted to be a CPR or a DNR. I explained the differences. I asked her the clothes she wanted to wear, songs she wanted played, the minister she wanted to do this thing, the place that she wanted, anything else that she thought was important. And she said, you know, I always knew you would be the one to wrap these things up for me. And I said, well, there's no sense in waiting, is there? And off I went with my notebook that day in October. I called my sister and I said, okay, well, that's done. Much like it was another project on my to-do list. And then one Saturday in May, I called my mother for that "what are you doing today?" phone call. And I knew immediately that she was very ill. A 2-pack-a-day smoker since she was a teenager. She couldn't breathe. I called my sister, explained what was happening, and told her that I was calling an ambulance, and once I did, Ma would never be going home again. I told my sister that things were going to be changing very quickly. I met the paramedics at Brighton Towers. My mother was fighting them and for those in nursing, a good O2 saturation in your blood is 90 and above. My mother's was 64. She was fighting them when they were trying to put oxygen on her. The reason she was fighting them is because she still had a cigarette in her hand. She wouldn't let that go. And just like I had predicted, my mother went from St. Joe's to Fahey Rehab to living in Loretto. And she never went home again. She lived at Loretto for 2 years and she carved out a life. She made friends. She hated being dependent and she despised being taken care of. So my mother became kind of like that teenager. And you know, parents, when you get a phone call from the school that your child is acting up in school, I got that phone call at Loretto because my mother was acting up at Loretto. I was working at Loretto and daily I would get phone calls from the nursing staff that my mother was misbehaving yet again. My mother was, she would have been a good leader of a street gang. She had this innate ability to stir the pot. She would get everyone around her riled and then she would kind of step back and watch everything around her just go crazy. That was my mother. She would sit there with her friends at the dining room table. And what do a bunch of little old ladies at a dining room table do? They talk about everybody. That's what my mother and her hoodlums did. They got into mischief. They would hide things from the nurses. If they told my mother to stand, she'd sit. If they told her to go left, she'd go right. She earned a title, non-compliant. My mother was non-compliant. And come get your mother, she's non-compliant. My mother, in this picture, should be wearing oxygen right now. You see that she's not. Why? She hid her oxygen tubing. That was my mother. She did make friends, and she had lots of them. She was on continuous oxygen, and she had to quit smoking cold turkey. Years of continuous alcohol abuse had damaged her brain and left her with a form of alcohol dementia. She had end-stage COPD, and she went to the hospital repeatedly to have fluid drained off her lungs. This weakened her over time. I was her healthcare proxy. I was employed at Loretto, so I saw her daily. 2 years into this, I watched and waited for my mother to die. Every day, I witnessed this, and I saw a little bit of her die each day. I, the keeper of the lists, I, the prepared one, was unprepared. All of my lists, all of my planning, all of my cold, calculated timeliness, my own lamp had no oil, and I didn't know what to do. My mother was terrified. I now saw that my mother was not only spiritual, but during her journey, she was now having running narratives with Jesus Christ and Mary and the saints. And she was now reaching for her own mother, my grandmother. And she began to tell my father that she was coming. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole, and I had no idea what to do. I'm trained in what to do, and I had no idea what to do. Who was my mother looking at when she was reaching? And what could I do but wait? So I waited with her. Me, the one who could not wait to get away from my mother, now waited with her. I waited with her as she reached her hands toward the air. And she kept telling me she didn't want to live long enough to be a mechanical lift. And she didn't want anyone feeding her. It was bad enough, she said, that she had to wear these damn things, as she pointed to her incontinent briefs. I tried to laugh it off and ask her if those were her only demands, but inwardly I was grieving the loss that was only beginning to hurt me. I fell into a ritual that became my lifeline. Every morning before work, I would go into the chapel and I would pray. And my prayer never changed. I prayed, "Dear Jesus, allow my mother to die with dignity." I prayed that she be allowed to die easily and with no pain. I prayed that Jimmy, my brother, make it to her in time, and that she be allowed to go in peace. I wanted nothing for myself. I simply wanted my mother's wait to be over. I would pray that same prayer every night before I went home, twice a day without fail. I couldn't leave Loretto until my ritual was done. My mother became depressed. More so because of the hospitalizations, and yes, the treatments were saving her life, but at what cost? What life? And I knew this job fell to me. I changed my mother to a DNR, and I stopped all treatment. This was on a Thursday. Thursday night, I took her downstairs where they were having a game night. They were serving ice cream. She didn't want to play a game, but she did eat strawberry ice cream. She got done and she looked at me. I took out my camera and I snapped a picture of her, and it's a terrible picture. She's not smiling. Her hair's not combed. She's bloated. She looks exhausted. And that is the last picture I have of my mother. I stayed that night until 11:30. She woke up at 7:30 the next morning very agitated and told her CNA, "I'm dying." She seemed to fall asleep. I got there at 9 a.m. with my son. She woke up, looked at us both, and never opened her eyes again. Little by little, her breathing slowed. Family arrived, and through the day, nursing staff kept her comfortable. There's a saying in nursing that dying people do one of two things. They will hang on until everyone leaves because they want to die alone. Or they will hang on until that one person shows up to make their passing complete. My mother did that. My brother was found. And like the obnoxious uncle at the beginning of the story, he arrived. My mother waited for him. She waited and waited. And when her son finally came back to her, she was at peace. My mother passed away at 5:25 p.m., March 2nd, 2012. I was the last one to leave my mother's room that night. Before I left Loretto, I had one more stop to make. I stopped at the chapel, as I had done for so long. I took my place, and this night I simply said two words. Thank you. 8 years, and I still remember every detail. I performed my mother's funeral because I was the one who knew what she wanted. I knew what she wanted read, the songs she wanted played, and the dress she wanted to wear, and it was my first and last real gift to my mother. And I still have a difficult time going into room 804 at Loretto, and I have bins and bins of my mother's possessions. I say today I'll go through my mother's things, and then I say another day won't hurt, and I find I still can't go through them. I look in the mirror and I see my mother looking back at me, and I think, how did this happen? And during my grief, I went back to my childhood home where so much happened to me. And it was like a time capsule. Parts of the house were caving in, but yet dishes were still in the sink. Clothes were still on hangers. Books were still in a bookcase. And somewhere during all the chaos and dysfunction of that house, we were a family. And I don't really know how that happened, but we were. Jim found out during this time of my grief that I was going back to this house, and he about had a fit because the house was literally falling down. And I went into that house and I just started grabbing things that made no sense. In that house, in a house where so much chaos reigned, we had a family Bible. I didn't know we even said one good word to each other growing up, but we had a family Bible. We had pictures. We had a life amongst all the chaos. Jim asked me repeatedly, don't go out there, you're gonna get killed, because all he could think about is the house was gonna fall down. But one day he went out there, and in his Jim way, he did something. He took wood from that house, and he made me jewelry. He made this jewelry from that house. He also took wood from the outhouse that we had because we were poor. I had an outhouse. He took wood from that outhouse and made jewelry, and I swear to God, I'm probably the only person in the world who proudly wears outhouse jewelry. But that's Jim. So he understood more than maybe I understood why I was doing what I did out in that house that brought me so much pain. And yet somewhere along the way, through my journey, I've forgiven my mother for everything. And I realized she did the best she could with the tools she had. And I got to spend the last chapter of her life with her in a very private way. And through that, I believe that put me in this position to speak with you about waiting. Waiting because you will never know when, despite all of your plans, you will find yourself desperately out of your element and very, very unprepared. Waiting because no matter who you are or what you are always welcome at the table, and forgiveness is always on the menu. None of us get through this life scot-free. We all have stuff. Sometimes our lamps are full and we're good to go. Sometimes they are completely empty and we have no way to fill them, and sometimes we don't even know where those lamps are. Those are the times we need each other. We need prayer. and we all need our crazy uncles. There was a song that I found very comforting during this time, and I wrote down the lyrics to it. And it said, I faced a mountain that I never faced before. That's why I'm calling on you, Lord. I know it's been a while. Lord, please hear my prayer. I need you now like I've never needed you before. Sometimes it takes a mountain, sometimes a troubled sea. Sometimes it takes a desert to get a hold of me. Your love is so much stronger than whatever troubles me. Sometimes it takes a mountain to trust you and believe. Forgive me, Jesus. I thought I could control whatever life would throw my way. But this, I admit, has brought me to my knees. I need you, Lord, and I'm not ashamed to say. Sometimes it takes a mountain to trust you and believe. Today's scripture tells us all about being ready for Jesus. Sometimes we wait. Sometimes we think we're ready. Sometimes we're running around like crazy. Wherever you are, however ready you are, trust and believe. Jesus is always there, waiting.